The dying sun bled crimson across the horizon, painting the cracked earth in shades of rust and shadow. Wind howled through the canyon passes, carrying dust and the distant cry of a lone coyote. The town of Bitter Creek crouched on the edge of nowhere, its weathered buildings leaning against each other like old men trying to keep from falling. Jake Sullivan guided his horse down the main street, hat pulled low against the stinging sand. At 32, he carried himself with the weight of a man who'd lived twice that long. A jagged scar cut from his left temple to his jaw, a souvenir from a war that ended 15 years ago but still haunted his dreams. He had come west to forget, to lose himself in the emptiness where a man could disappear if he wanted badly enough. The Broken Wheel Saloon stood like a promise of whiskey and anonymity. Jake tied his horse to the hitching post, his movements slow and deliberate, and pushed through the swinging doors. Inside, smoke hung thick in the air. The smell of sweat, dust, and cheap liquor clung to everything. Men hunched over cards and bottles, faces drawn and weathered from years of hard living. That's when he saw her. She stood near the bar, her back straight, though her shoulders trembled from exhaustion. Her dark hair was pinned properly, but wisps had escaped to frame a face that might have been beautiful, if not for the tightness around her mouth and the shadows under her eyes. Her dress was clean but threadbare, marked by the long miles of travel. She couldn't have been more than 25, but her eyes, brown and tired, belonged to someone who had lived far longer. 3 men had cornered her against the bar. Jake recognized their kind immediately, drifters who mistook a lone woman for easy prey. "Come on, sweetheart." The biggest one slurred, his breath thick with rot-gut whiskey. A pretty thing like you shouldn't be drinking, alone. "Let old Bill here buy you something stronger." "I said no, thank you," she replied, her voice steady but trembling at the edges. "I'd appreciate it if you left me be." Bill grinned, his yellowed teeth catching the lamplight. "Hear that, boys? She'd appreciate it. Ain't she proper?" He reached for her arm. "Maybe you need to learn how things work out here. A woman without a man's protection." The lady asked to be left alone. Jake hadn't meant to speak. He'd spent years avoiding other people's troubles. But something about the way she stood, proud despite her fear, moved him before he could stop himself. Bill turned, bloodshot eyes narrowing. "This ain't your concern, stranger." Jake stepped closer, his hand resting near his holstered Colt. "I'm making it my concern." The saloon grew silent. Men who had been pretending not to notice suddenly found their drinks very interesting. Even the bartenders started clearing bottles from the counter. Bill's companions shifted uneasily. They'd seen men like Jake before, soldiers who had stared too long into death and walked away colder for it. "We don't want no trouble," one muttered. For a moment, the air hung heavy, thick with the promise of violence. Then Bill spat on the floor near Jake's boots and backed away. "Ain't worth it anyway," he sneered. "Probably just another used-up dove trying to act respectable." They shambled out into the night, leaving behind muttered curses and heavy silence. Jake waited until the door stopped swinging, then turned to the woman. "You all right, ma'am?" She studied him warily. "I didn't ask for your help." "No, ma'am, you didn't." He tipped his hat. "My apologies for interfering." He started to turn away, but her hand caught his sleeve. Her touch was feather-light. "Wait, thank you. I'm not usually so ungracious. It's been a long road." "Where from?" "Back east, Missouri." She didn't elaborate, and Jake didn't press. Everyone who came west was running from something. "You got people here?" A bitter smile touched her lips. "No people anywhere now." Jake understood that kind of loneliness. "You eaten?" "Yesterday, maybe the day before." She tried to sound casual, but her voice cracked. Jake left without a word. The saloon watched him go. Grace, he would learn that was her name, watched too, confusion flickering across her face. He returned minutes later with a cloth bundle. "Sam's wife makes biscuits for me sometimes," he said, setting it down. "There's ham too." Her hands trembled as she unwrapped the food. She tried to eat slowly, with dignity, but hunger won. Jake looked away, giving her privacy. "Why are you helping me?" she asked softly when she'd finished. Jake stared at the amber liquid in his glass. "Maybe because you didn't cry," he said. "Most would have. Tears don't change anything, she said quietly. They just make you look weak. Outside, the night had deepened, the wind turning sharp. Jake noticed her shiver. You looking for work? Mrs. Chen runs the boarding house. I tried. She said no positions were open. Grace looked down. I think she just didn't want a woman with no references. No past. Jake's jaw tightened. A woman alone in these parts was assumed to be one kind of woman only, no matter who she truly was. He stood suddenly. Come on! Grace blinked. Where we going? My cabin's 2 miles north. There's a lean-to where you can bed down. It ain't much, but it's shelter. I couldn't. People are already talking, Jake said, glancing around the saloon. At least up there, you'll have a roof. Grace hesitated, then nodded. All right. They stepped into the cold desert night. The stars hung sharp and bright over the empty plains. Jake helped her onto his horse and led it on foot. Neither spoke. The only sounds were hooves on hard earth and the whispering wind. When they reached the cabin, Jake lit a lantern. The small room was simple but clean. 1 bed, a stove, 2 chairs, and silence. He knelt by the hearth, coaxing a fire to life. Warmth crept into the room, soft and golden. I'll get my bedroll from the stable, he said, reaching for his coat. Grace stood by the stove, arms wrapped around herself. Jake, she whispered, can I sleep beside you, cowboy? The words froze him where he stood. Her eyes were wide, not bold, not teasing, but desperate. I don't mean, she faltered. I just don't want to be alone. Not tonight. Jake turned slowly. He saw in her face the same emptiness he carried, the same ache for safety, for simple human closeness. Ma'am, he said carefully, that wouldn't be proper. Nothing about my life is proper anymore. The wind rattled the shutters. Jake closed the door slowly, his mind warring with itself. You take the bed, he said finally. I'll sleep by the fire. Grace nodded, shoulders sagging. She didn't argue. Jake spread his blankets on the floor. The firelight danced on the walls, painting them both in amber and shadow. Thank you, Grace whispered. For everything. Jake didn't answer. He lay staring into the flames, wondering what ghosts this woman carried, and why, for the first time in years, he cared. The fire crackled softly, filling the cabin with the faint scent of pine and smoke. Outside, the wind whispered across the barren land like a restless spirit. Jake lay on the floor near the stove, staring up at the ceiling beams, listening to Grace's quiet breathing from the bed. He told himself he was awake because of habit, because years of war had trained him to sleep light, but he knew the truth. He was listening to make sure she was still there. Sometime after midnight, Grace's voice broke the silence. Why do you live out here alone? Jake thought about ignoring the question, but something about her tone, fragile, genuine, made him answer. Because sometimes, when a man's done enough wrong, the best thing he can do for the world is stay out of it. What kind of wrong? He hesitated. The kind that visits you at night. The kind that makes you wake up swinging. Grace was silent for a moment. Then, softly, is that how you got your scar? Jake touched the mark without thinking. No, that came later. Tried to protect people who didn't want protecting. Kind of like tonight. Grace smiled faintly in the dim light. But you did it anyway. Fool habit I can't break, he muttered. She pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. I had a husband once, she said after a long pause. Henry Porter. He owned a store back in Independence. Everyone said he was a good man. Jake stayed silent. He could tell by her voice that she needed to speak more than she needed comfort. My father owed him money, she continued, so he offered to clear the debt if I married him. I was 18. He was nearly 40. He wasn't cruel exactly, just cold. Every word, every gesture, every touch was a transaction. When he died last year, I thought I was free. Her voice broke for the first time. Then his brother came, claiming Henry owed him money too. Said the only way to settle the debt was if I married him. When I refused, he threatened to ruin me. Said he'd make sure no decent man would ever take me in. So I ran. Jake closed his eyes. He'd seen men like that before, men who believed women were property to trade or punish. You been running ever since? 3 months, she whispered. Every town, the same questions, the same stares. I thought if I got far enough west, maybe I could start over. Jake turned his head toward her. In the flickering firelight, he could see her eyes glistening. Takes courage to choose uncertainty over safety, he said quietly. Or foolishness, quote. Sometimes they're the same thing. She smiled at that, small, weary, but real. The fire burned low. Outside, an owl called. Grace's breathing steadied, and Jake thought she'd fallen asleep. Then he felt her move. Bare feet brushed the wooden floor. A moment later, she knelt beside him. "Grace," he said softly, not opening his eyes. "I can't sleep," she whispered. "I keep hearing things. The wind, the coyotes, my own heartbeat. I haven't felt safe in months." Jake turned his head toward her. She sat beside him, close, but not touching, her hands clasped in her lap. "You should go back to bed," he said gently. "I will. I just wanted to be near someone who wouldn't hurt me." Jake's chest tightened. "Grace, I'm not a good man. You're the first man in years who didn't take what he could." That silenced him. She reached out, her hand finding his in the dark. "I'm not afraid of you, Jake Sullivan." He should have pulled away. Instead, he let her hand stay there. Small, warm, trembling. "Get some rest," he murmured finally. "We both need it," quote. She nodded, but she didn't move away. She lay down beside him on the floor, keeping that fragile distance between them. Close enough for comfort, far enough for decency. And for the first time in years, Jake slept without nightmares. When he woke at dawn, pale light crept through the window. Grace was still asleep, her head resting against his shoulder. For a long moment, Jake didn't move. The scent of her hair, the warmth of her breath. It was dangerous, intoxicating. He carefully shifted, replacing himself with a folded blanket. Grace stirred but didn't wake. He stepped outside into the cold morning air, splashed water on his face from the well, and tried to clear his head. He'd lived too long alone to trust how easily this woman had cracked his walls. When he came back in, she was awake, sitting on the edge of the bed. Her hair was loose around her shoulders, soft and dark against the pale light. She looked up quickly. "I should go," she said. "You've been kind, but people will talk." Jake poured coffee into a tin cup. "People talk no matter what you do. Might as well eat while they're doing it." She hesitated, then accepted the cup. "Why are you helping me, really?" "Maybe I'm tired of minding my own business," he said simply. They ate in silence, the air between them charged with something fragile and unspoken. After breakfast, Jake saddled his horse. "You remember Tom Martinez? Rancher outside town. His wife passed last spring, got 3 young ones. He's needin' help. I'll ride down, see if he'll take you on." Grace looked up sharply. "You'd do that for me." Jake shrugged. Man can't fix the world, but he can make one corner of it less cruel. Later that day, Jake rode into town. The streets were busier now, wagons, ranchers, women carrying baskets. But every eye followed him. News traveled fast in Bitter Creek. He found Tom at the livery. "You still need help with the young ones?" Tom wiped his hands. "I do, but what's this about?" "Woman named Grace Porter," Jake said. "Educated, hard worker, needs honest work in a safe place." Tom frowned. "That the one came in with you last night?" Jake's jaw tightened. "She was in trouble. I helped, that's all." Tom studied him for a long moment. "You vouch for her?" "I do." "Then bring her by. We'll see what we can do." By the time Jake returned to the cabin, the sun was sliding low. Grace had tidied the place, swept the floor, washed the dishes, even placed a wildflower in a tin cup on the table. "You didn't have to do that," Jake said. "I needed to feel useful," she answered. "What did he say?" "He'll see you this afternoon." Relief flickered in her eyes, chased by worry. "And the rest of the town?" "They'll talk," Jake said. "Let 'em. It's what they do best." Grace smiled faintly. You really don't care what people think?" Quote. He looked at her for a long moment. "Used to. Stopped when I realized the world'll judge you anyway." She stepped closer. "Then maybe that's something we share." Jake couldn't find words. He just nodded toward the door. "We'd better ride before the sun drops." They rode in silence toward the Martinez ranch, dust rising behind them, the sky streaked in colors of dying fire. Jake stole a glance at her, the way she held herself upright, the faint hope in her eyes, and he realized with a start that he didn't want her to go. But he said nothing. When they reached the ranch, Tom greeted them kindly and led Grace inside to meet his children. Jake waited outside, listening to their laughter drift through the open window. When she stepped out again, her smile was small but genuine. "He offered me work," she said, "teaching the children, keeping the house." Jake tipped his hat. "Good. You'll be safe here." Grace looked at him, eyes glistening. "And you? Will you be all right?" "I've been all right a long time," he said quietly. "Just don't know what that means anymore." She touched his arm. "You saved me, Jake. I won't forget that." He looked away, jaw tightening. "You don't owe me anything." "Maybe not," she whispered. "But I want to." Jake mounted his horse and rode off without looking back, afraid that if he did, he might turn around and never leave. That night, back in his cabin, he found the wildflower she'd left behind. He should have thrown it out. Instead, he poured water into the cup and set it back on the table. Outside, the wind howled across the empty land. Inside, Jake Sullivan sat alone. But for the first time in years, the silence didn't feel quite so heavy. 3 quiet weeks passed after that night. The town of Bitter Creek moved on, but Jake hadn't. He still rode the same dusty trails, mended the same fences, sat by the same fire. Yet nothing felt the same. The silence that used to comfort him now just echoed with Grace's voice. The cabin, once a refuge, felt empty no matter how many logs he threw on the fire. He told himself she was safe now, working for Tom Martinez, helping with his children, building a new life. That was what he wanted for her. But most nights, Jake found himself riding near the Martinez ranch without even meaning to. He'd watch from the ridge just long enough to see the light from the window where she taught the children, then ride back into the dark before anyone could spot him. The peace he'd tried to make with solitude was unraveling, thread by thread. It was a Tuesday afternoon when the storm broke. Jake was repairing a fence line when the sound of galloping hooves carried across the plains. He straightened, hand already at his gun. Sheriff Ben Carter rode hard up the ridge, a cloud of dust chasing him, his horse lathered, his face grim. "Trouble," the sheriff called before he'd even stopped. Jake wiped the sweat from his brow. "What kind?" "The Hutchkins gang," Carter said. 8 of 'em. They rode into town an hour ago. Shot up the broken wheel. Took cash from every business. "They're saying they want you, Jake. Said you made 'em look like fools that night in the saloon." Jake's jaw tightened. He'd known Bill Hutchkins would come back eventually. Men like him always did. "Anybody hurt?" "Not yet," Carter said. "But they're holed up in the saloon now, drunk and mean. And they're asking for Grace Porter by name." Jake's blood went cold. "Grace?" "Yeah. Said they were going to drag her out and teach her what happens to folks who side with you." Jake didn't wait to hear more. He grabbed his rifle and mounted up. "Tell the others to stay clear. I'll handle it." "Jake," Carter warned, "you can't take on 8 men alone." Jake looked back once, his eyes flat and steady. "I already have." He rode into Bitter Creek like a storm. The townspeople scattered from the street as they saw him coming. The saloon doors creaked in the hot wind. Through the dusty windows, shadows moved. Jake dismounted, tied his horse, and stepped into the street, each stride slow and deliberate. He stopped in front of the broken wheel, his voice cutting through the silence. "Bill Hutchkins!" For a moment there was no answer. Then laughter, harsh, ugly, familiar. "Well, if it ain't the hero of Bitter Creek," a voice sneered. "Come on in, soldier boy. We've been waiting for you." Jake pushed through the doors. The room went still. 8 men, all armed, all watching him. Hutchkins stood in the center, a whiskey bottle in one hand and a pistol in the other, his arm bandaged from their last encounter. "Come to die, Sullivan." "Come to end it," Jake said. Bill's grin twisted. "You always did think you were better than the rest of us. You ain't. You're just another killer hiding behind a fancy code." "Maybe," Jake said softly, "but I don't shoot women. You cross that line, you die." Bill's grin faltered. "You think you scare me?" Jake's gaze swept the room. "You should be." The next few seconds happened faster than thought. Bill's gun twitched upward, but Jake was already moving. His Colt cleared leather, and the first shot hit Bill in the shoulder, spinning him sideways. Another man by the bar fired wildly. Jake dropped him with a second shot. Then the room exploded in chaos. Muzzle flashes, splinters, smoke. Jake moved like he had in the war. Calm, deadly, each motion precise. When the gunfire stopped, the only sound was the crackle of a burning whiskey bottle on the floor. 4 men lay dead. 3 wounded. 1, Bill Hutchkins, writhed on the floor, clutching his shoulder. Jake reloaded slowly, eyes cold. "Take your wounded and ride out. If I see any of you in Bitter Creek again, you won't get a second chance." Quote. The surviving men dragged Bill out, cursing and bleeding. Sheriff Carter and Tom Martinez arrived moments later. Tom's face was pale. "Jake," he said, "they hit the ranch before town, took Grace." Jake froze. "What?" "They grabbed her on the road. She sent the children to hide in the root cellar, left a note for you." Tom handed him a crumpled paper. Jake unfolded it, heart pounding. In Grace's handwriting, "They took me. Said it's your fault. Don't come after me. Take care of the children." He read it twice. Then he mounted up without a word. "Jake!" the sheriff shouted. "You can't go alone." Jake didn't answer. The only sound was the pounding of hooves as he rode out of town, heading north toward the Badlands. The trail wasn't hard to follow. 5 horses, riding fast but not smart. He tracked them across dry creek beds and rocky ridges, the anger in him burning cold and clean. By sunset, he found their camp in a canyon. 5 men, a fire, and Grace tied near the horses. He dismounted quietly, checking his rifle. Years of soldiering came back, like muscle memory. He took position behind a rock and waited until one of the men stood, walking toward Grace. She spit at his boots. The man raised his hand. Jake's rifle spoke once. The man fell. Panic erupted. The rest scrambled for cover, shooting wildly into the rocks. Jake moved like a ghost, shifting position, counting muzzle flashes. 1 shot. 2. 3. Each found its mark. When the last echo faded, only the wind remained. Jake approached Grace carefully. She looked up at him, tears cutting clean lines through the dust on her face. "I told you not to come," she whispered. "Not really my style," Jake said, cutting her ropes. "You hurt?" "No," she said, rubbing her wrists. "They wanted me alive, said I was bait." He helped her stand. "Then they learned the wrong man to bait." Grace's voice shook. "You killed them all." "Yes. For me." Jake met her eyes. "For you." Something broke inside her then, or maybe something healed. She threw her arms around him, trembling. "I was so scared," she whispered against his chest. "Not of dying, of never seeing you again." Quote. Jake's throat tightened. He held her close, his voice low. "You're safe now." They rode back under the rising moon, the desert silver and silent around them. When Bitter Creek's lights came into view, Grace's hand found his across the gap between their horses. The town gathered to meet them. Tom, Sheriff Carter, and half the townsfolk. Grace was safe. Jake was bleeding from a graze he hadn't even noticed. The people who had once whispered behind their backs now looked at them with awe. But the peace didn't last long. A week later, the mayor called a meeting. "Sullivan," he said, "8 men dead in one day. We can't have that kind of violence in this town." Jake stood tall. "You'd rather they burned it down?" The Reverend spoke up. "This woman's presence brings trouble. First the saloon, then the kidnapping. A decent woman wouldn't. Enough, Jake said, voice hard. You want to blame someone? Blame me. I pulled the trigger. Grace stepped forward, eyes blazing. And if he hadn't, I'd be dead. Is that what you'd prefer, Reverend? For decency's sake, quote. The room fell silent. Then Tom Martinez spoke. Seems to me Jake Sullivan saved this town, twice, and Miss Porter saved my children. If that's sin, I reckon we could use more of it. The murmurs turned. The tide shifted. Jake took Grace's hand. We're done hiding, he said. We'll leave if you want us gone, but if we stay as we are together. The Reverend's face reddened. Unmarried? It's indecent? Jake turned to him. Then marry us. The room went still. Grace's eyes widened. Jake! He looked at her, voice steady. I've lived half my life alone. I'm done with that. You said you wanted safety. Stay with me, Grace. Let's build something worth fighting for. Her voice trembled, but her smile was steady. Yes, Jake Sullivan. Yes. The Reverend sputtered, but Sheriff Carter grinned. Then I reckon we got ourselves a wedding to plan. They were married at sunset, in front of the whole town, under the same desert sky where they had once stood as strangers. Grace wore a simple white dress sewn overnight by the women of Bitter Creek. Jake's scar caught the dying light like silver. As they exchanged vows, the wind rose, carrying the scent of dust and sage. When the Reverend said, "You may kiss the bride," Jake leaned in, and the crowd cheered. The same town that had once judged them now celebrated them. That night, as the stars came out over the vast Wyoming plain, Jake and Grace stood outside their small cabin, hands intertwined. Not the wedding I dreamed of, she said softly. Maybe not, Jake answered, but the one we were meant to have. He looked out at the open land, then down at her. You once asked if you could sleep beside me, Grace Porter. Now you never have to ask again. She smiled up at him. I know. And under the endless Wild West sky they held each other close, two broken souls finally whole, proof that even in the hardest land love could still take root and bloom.